Hello everyone. Good morning. Today Maria and myself Meet are going to present our project Mylang, which is a passive ventilation system in the urban context of Milan. In the current scenario, climate change is a global issue worldwide, and urban cities are the primary prey of these issues of pollution and densification. The environmental problems will rise with the rise in the population for which suitable measures has to be taken. Milan, Italy is the study area for this project as it stands third in the list of most polluted cities with very high values of PM 2.5 and NO2. This results from its geographical location as it's surrounded by mountain ranges causing thermal inversion. Milan also comes under EU Green Building Energy Efficiency Pact, so suitable measures has to be taken. To understand the cause of air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions from various sectors were examined, of which energy production emits the maximum, and the maximum is used for HVAC system. Commercial spaces, energy usage, and universal thermal climate index are relatively higher than the residential ones. So for the project's investigation, commercial spaces to develop passive ventilation system have been considered. To adapt the passive ventilation from nature, the best precedent in nature, the termite mound, was studied, as they are efficiently regulate the internal temperature of the mound. The termite mound follows the principles of convection loop by absorbing the heat from the environment to regulate the temperature inside the mound. Primary principles were extracted for design development by comparing various types of mound: bulge for solar radiation, depression for wind, convection loop for tubular network system, and egress complex and lateral connectors for wind capture and turbulence. In MSc phase of Mylang, a passive ventilation system for a new tower morphology was developed. The abstracted principles of bulge and depression from the mound were analyzed with the initial CFD experiments to understand the system scalability for architectural application. Similarly, the convection looping system abstracted from the mound was analyzed with CFD by providing different temperatures to the exterior tubes. For MSc phase, the environmental and abstracted biomimetic principles were used at various experimental stages for passive ventilation system development for the tower. After post-analyzing these individual experiments at the MSc phase, they were considered to develop the integrated passive ventilation system for urban scale at MArch phase. The project then developed the retrofitted passive ventilation system for existing building in an urban fabric of Milan. This system captures wind from outside, circulates through it, and supply it to the building's HVAC system. This system enhances internal as well as outdoor thermal comfort of the space. This is the entire project's workflow, which has been segmented into 5 sections, considering the urban scale to detailing the project. So we questioned where could this passive ventilation system be retrofitted in the context of Milan.
For these, 4 city centers with PM 2.5 census were selected, and the site with the highest values were shortlisted after analyzing the average monthly values of all further investigation. 3 zones across that city center were selected considering the land use, and the UTCI values of extreme summer and winter months and CFD analysis were employed to identify the worst-case scenario and the macro scale. Simultaneously, as an understanding of the usability of urban space outside office areas was carried out. The space is maximally utilized during office hours with high humidity and radiation and becomes dead space outside the office hours. Integrating a system can enhance the outdoor thermal comfort and foster a cultural environment. Also, the office complexes were identified for microscale analysis, and the shortlisting was done by calculating the UTCI values, CFD, and sun radiation. The shortlisted site was analyzed using CFD for all the months, and the maximum wind flow is through the east and southeast. So the same was considered for the system development. Based on the basis of CFD, 4 locations for system integration were considered to channel the wind within the building and also enhance the outdoor thermal comfort. To set up the individual experiments, the factor of UTCI were used to set the domains for each experiment, which helped to achieve the desired values of these factors to enhance thermal comfort.
For which, how would this passive ventilation system capture the wind effectively? So we designed the porosity panels which were evolved. To collect the wind efficiently, 2 principal components of a termite mound were translated. Type A for higher porosity with linear volume to capture wind, B with low porosity with shift volumes creating turbulence, and C as a connector for a smoother transition between the two. The organization of these panels is according to the wind intensity as per altitude. Type A for higher altitude, B for lower altitude to turbulent the wind, and C as a connector between the two. An evolutionary multi-objective optimization was employed to evolve the components considering porosity level, wind capture, volume for less material use, and overall less deformation. The best performing phenotype was shortlisted using various levels of selection strategy. Simultaneously, these components were tested at a regional scale to identify the aggregation section where it captures maximum wind. Similarly, for type B component uses the same workflow, and the phenotype with less porosity to create maximum wind turbulence was selected. And for type C, it was the same workflow followed, and the phenotype which has the combination of high and low porosity was shortlisted. This acts as a connector for smoother transition between A and B. The materials for development of these panels will be understood. Italy generates massive agricultural waste yearly. So agro-based materials were considered for panel development. Various ratios were tested and the best performing ones were selected. They were physically tested for load and thermal insulation for further development. And the best ratio was then taken forward to fabricate 1/4 of the component. The aggregation of the porosity panels can also enhance the growth of biofilm, which can sequester carbon from the environment. So where would these panels would be aggregated in response to the building context? For which a morphology was developed, as it also plays an important role in wind capture and turbulence.
Morphology evaluation started by analyzing various column profiles using CFD to understand wind turbulence and capture for the building. Various morphology heights were also analyzed using CFD to capture wind from high altitudes, but in this case, the wind was channeled only in 2 paths without flowing through the system. The central voids were introduced to let the wind flow through the system above within the morphology. The best selected morphology was analyzed to understand the performance at various levels for further system development. The internal UTCI values of all the buildings were extracted to identify areas for system application. Simultaneously, the volume of air required for ventilation in these current office spaces was calculated considering the air exchange rate of the ASHRAE clause. The number of columns required for each building, considering the 4 different areas for intervention, was calculated. And a detailed investigation was carried out for scenario A only. A light physics engine is implemented for this purpose that considers the area of application as input to set the base mesh. These vertices of the mesh are set as anchor points and then displaced to form the bulge mesh. And also this will be the column profile of the structure. The morphology was sectioned in 2 parts, top and bottom, and the bottom part was considered with constant height considering modularity, whereas different heights were considered for top part to capture more wind. Simulation for both was carried out individually. First, the live physics engine was run on the bottom part, where different loads are applied on each side of the arches to achieve a valley shape profile to channel the wind and also to control the overall surface curvature. To calibrate the model, an evolutionary multi-objective optimization engine is implemented considering various fitness objectives of surface area, shadows on the ground, column curvature, and wind catchment. As a result, the selection methodology emphasizes prioritizing curvature with minimum surface area. The same process is carried out for the top part, where the loads with different intensities were applied on each side of the arches to attain a valley shape with minimal height on the first and last arches, and the central arch with maximum efficiently captured winds for all directions. As before, the optimization process is carried out for the top part as well, with the additional fitness objective of solar radiation on mesh. Here, the selection strategy emphasizes prioritizing solar radiation with minimum surface area. And this is the resulting for finding through the physics simulation. Now, several partitions were done to the resulting mesh to deliberate the structure. First, the partition is done along the X direction, resulting in the creation of side A and side B. The second partition sets aside those regions with unsuitable curvature for panel application. And the third partition involves an octagonal subdivision of each arch on both parts. And finally, only on the top sections, areas with the highest solar radiation values are excluded for hosting the tubular system that absorbs heat for the thermosiphon effect. And this is the final partition of the morphology for various porosity levels. That delineates the external structure that is composed by chimney, that is the primary member, vertical rods, and horizontal rods that are found by intersecting the bottom and the top part with an array of planes every 1 meter. Then the external structure is connected via an internal structure that is supported from the chimney. To test the stability of the structure, a fee analysis is carried out with defined sections and materials for each element, and the total displacement results quite low, and the utilization factor mostly under compression. Lastly, the panelization process consists on dividing each surface into single panels as per its size. Machine learning K-mean clustering is implemented first to outline adequate areas for panels, and then divide them into groups to determine the location of panel type A, B, and consequently type C in the transition between the two. And this is a detailed representation of the different systems together. And this is the final morphology with the structure panels between the buildings.
So how would this passive ventilation system function internally with these panels and the morphology? For which the internal network system was developed to create the convection loop. The internal network for convection loop for the entire system works same. The column on the right is just the part of which it shows the integration of the internal system, which has multiple tubular networks. The network A is generated through the shortest path at multiple levels, connecting to the network B, which runs parallel to the chimney, and then to the condenser. This network conveys captured wind from the porosity panels to the convection loop. Then from the condenser, it's supplied to vents via chimney. The air supplied to vents turbulates through additional volume integration, which was evolved through CFD analysis. This enhances the speed as it is supplied through the outside of the convection loop. The porosity panels on this retrofitted system engage with the outdoor environment to capture the wind and supply it to the entire system for convection loop. The collection chamber attached to the porosity panels first collects the wind. Then it is conveyed to the condenser through tubular network system A and B. Simultaneously, the heat absorbed by the heated tubes on the top of the system is supplied to the condenser for thermosiphon effect. All the wind accumulated in the condenser is conveyed to the chimney and then to the vents, ultimately integrating with the existing building's HVAC system. Even though the system was tested for one, using the same principles, the system integration, it can be adapted for various site scenarios across Milan and other parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Very interesting. I understood all the function itself of what you created, what you proposed. I think I have a tiny question. You are merging this into buildings in different areas of Milan. Is this a random thing? What kind of buildings? What is the logic? It seems to me more of an architectural object in order to, plug into other things. But what's the intention to build all this structure, this functionality into the existing fabric? I think I've missed that part.
Okay, so like initially in the MSc phase, we developed it for a tower from the scratch for the development, and this is a retrofitted to the existing office buildings.
Okay.
So initially, there is a development from scratch, the system was developed that in the MSc phase. So to take that into an urban context, we have developed the retrofitted as well. So right now, a system which is already there for the tower and for retrofitted.
Okay, great, thank you. And my second question is there a reason for, the shape and form as it is? Or, it can take any kind of other shape?
So, like as we were going through the MSc phase as well, the curvature and various depressions were considered. Like various CFD analysis was done backhand to understand that which curvature works and which not. Considering that, we decided the domains for this experiment, and using that, we developed the morphology for it.
Okay. The reason I'm asking this is, if I think about it from an urban perspective, to your architecture, to your system, you showed at the beginning I think 4 areas or 5 areas in different places. 3, say. Every area, again, has its own context, has its own uniqueness, and climatic conditions is not the same, the orientation of the street in one sense or another. So what I'm trying to say is different forms and shapes in its function is going to be different in every location. And that's why I'm saying, if this is a prototype to be repeated, or is it going to be unique and tailored to the buildings and the context that you are proposing, and also to the character of the place as well, right?
It would be, the idea is would be tailored for each of the different places, of course, depending on the context and all the wind direction and the UTCI values that are calculated there.
Right. Okay. So I guess this is what I was just trying to relate back, is very much of an functional architectural morphology. And I think I'm just trying to understand it. It's great that it's about within retrofitting the building, but it also has the impact to that city-wide context and planning and social context. Yeah. I think probably maybe I've missed that. Maybe it's there and it's thought through. But those would be my comments. Otherwise, it was a very nice presentation. So thank you for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. This is very nice. I can't help but think, and you're in Milan, and I know it can be in other places, but it's in Milan, and there is a tradition of the galleries, right? So it seems like it is ingrained into that. So maybe it would be nice to know how it relates to that culture that has to do with climate, and now you're adding the fact that it's not a gallery for like a commercial gallery, but it's more to feed the building's air systems. So at the very end, when that happened, I was thinking of that all the time, like why would we insert any intervention apart, like of course there is a public space that you are building up, but you are putting a lot of effort into this sort of capture and accumulation and then the panelization. So I think in a way it seems that the way to find the performance and the form of the intervention could be more balanced with the neighboring buildings as well. How much do they need? What is the floor plan? I would love to see a ground floor plan where the uses and the functionalities of the neighboring buildings come into these columns. Are these columns thick enough? Maybe they are holes for entry to these buildings. So you change also the way this operates. Maybe then it's too tall. Maybe it's not about having enough airflow for a certain season. Maybe you are not super optimal, but then you're adding something to the typologies next to it. Yeah. So I feel like what I really like is that you are inserting yourself. You're not saying enough, I think, about why you are inserting yourself there culturally, but I think it makes sense, so that's why I'm bringing it up. And then maybe, again, like to fit it more with what is needed as a sort of symbiosis with what is in the context. And lastly, about the module, which I think is a very nice exploration, and it's very well kind of developed. Also, what I think is a strength of your presentation in particular is that you focused on wind mostly, so you are insisting on one problem, and I really value that, because sometimes we can do so much and we can kind of shift and start talking about something else, but you insisted on this, and I think that's the strength of your project. And then when I see this image, I'm a bit like, can we see the module again? Can it come into this scale? Because it seems like it's about, and I go back to the idea of the galleries, they were like mostly glass or still frame, and they had an intricacy to them. So it seems this has, again, an intricacy, and why? It has for another reason. And that's why I bring the dialogue, because I feel this double dialogue of the small scale of the intricacy of the space, how the light comes in, this atmosphere that you're generating is quite interesting. So kind of, can we architecturalize it? Like, can we qualify it? And then it would be kind of whole, no? So sorry for asking for more, but I think that could be added. Thank you.
So adding to that, so to calculate the column sizes and everything, we have like considered the area of the existing building, and using the air exchange minimum requirement as per ASHRAE, we have calculated how much air exchange is required for that space. Considering that, we have added the columns.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you. You started your presentation with a lot of analysis of termite mounds, right? So, did you just start doing some CFD analysis yourself, or did you like previous research that has happened on how these termite mounds work, and who did you research for that?
No, like we were referring to the already existing articles, and then using those knowledge, we started understanding the angles and stuff like that, and then we did like. Obviously, that was at a smaller scale of a termite mound, but understanding the ratios and that, how it can be scaled to an architectural intervention, we did those analysis.
So that's kind of where I'm struggling a little bit with this project, is that the termite mound works on actually quite a small scale as well. And as a retrofit project, I just can't get around the fact that you've built so much. Right, you almost build another building, really, right? And that's the issue I have with the project. I think for a retrofit project, which is, retrofit is super important. We don't need to build more in this world, right? Even if you try to do it with very sustainable materials, there will be still carbon use to do. There's a lot of it. So I can't stop thinking that your retrofit might have been better by using much smaller elements. And, could you have retrofitted the buildings with certain panels just not existing out of this, right? And researching that really, so it doesn't become this big thing suddenly, right? And I think in your analysis and the optimization, there's a little bit of a problem when you do optimizations. I think that we kind of lie to ourselves quite often, right? Because what you do in optimization, you kind of set out the parameters. So you actually already create what the solution space is going to be. You kind of find an optimum in this area. But what if this area is not really the right thing, and an optimum is actually right over there? And I think that's what happened here. You kind of set a certain shape that kind of looks a bit like a termite mound. It doesn't need to look like a termite mound, to be honest. And then you found this optimum. Right? And you're very happy with it because it's a small optimum. No, it's not, I think. For me, it's really not an optimum. So you have to be careful with that. Like you setting these boundaries, you setting the parameters in your grasshopper model is a really strong act of design. And, and that's an issue. And that's what I'm kind of, when to bit that you suddenly created this big thing, which are really, I don't think was necessary. in the end of the day. So a lot of it. That's what I keep on saying. So I think you could have been much more surgical with this building. And what other people said as well, Laura and Anna said, like, you know, how could you be more with the neighborhood and kind of looking at what the existing buildings look like? Also, you kind of made your existing buildings these perspex, which is already a thing for me. You made them not really a thing. It doesn't seem to be important for you what these buildings look like. It is important, right? So, that would be my main critique on this one. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I guess just I build up a little bit on what has been said before, because I also think, well, first of all, you chose Milan, which is very peculiar and in terms of microclimate, and you show it to us, and it's very interesting. But my argument is that the benefit that you would get from the wind, you would need it in the summer, where the wind is notoriously quite slow in Milan. And also your orientation, I've got some questions on there. Thankfully, I'm not an MEP engineer, because that would be quite, for me, a very interesting exercise in making it work and maintain it, because it looks like you've got lots of gear there. But my main question is, how do you channel the wind against sort of almost against its own pattern? So you're proposing to capture the wind at a high speed and then channel it down. Your simulation didn't quite go down there into that detail, but I found it very interesting, but also probably difficult. So I think back to Xavier's point, I'd be quite interested to have seen that proposal translated maybe into the facade building with the right orientation, the right, also to create maybe a little bit more of dishomogeneity in the system. But I'm not quite understanding how that sort of size translates because of your analysis, let's say. Okay. What defines the height of the central bit? What is the reason for that?
We tested, we analyzed that using CFD, the same heights, the moderate height and the highest height. And considering that, we understood that what is bringing down the wind. And introducing that voids as well, we did an analysis that is there a need of voids or is there not, we don't need voids. But giving that central voids into the morphology brings the wind down into the system and gets into the entire passive ventilation which is inside through the panels.
Exactly. The only other point, I think I'm very interested about the material.
Okay.
Perhaps not necessarily in this application, as unfortunately Milan is quite humid as a city as well, and you'd end up capturing quite a lot of the humidity, and it feels that you've got quite a fragile material there, but it is a very interesting compound, and perhaps maybe it could be used as a lining for insulation, and it feels like it's got the right property for that as well. But but thank you. It's a very good presentation.
Thank you so much.